here's Joe Biden, and November 20th, 1942, 8:30 a.m., Scranton, Pennsylvania. And so we're going to talk about Joe Biden's chart, one of his fixed stars as well, and one of his Sabian symbols that's going to be hit by the elections of 2020. You see my keynote presentation because I'm presenting here so you can see the arrows where I'm pointing to. And I want you to notice in the birth chart, first of all, that Joe has a lot of Scorpio in his chart: Mars, Mercury, Sun, and Venus. Some of this will be hit very significantly on the elections in the days and weeks following. He's Sagittarius rising, 3 degrees. Note here some of the Gemini energy, but really strong the Jupiter in Cancer that we're going to talk about. And then his North Node, which happens to be at the same degree, and his Chiron at the same degrees as Trump's Mars and Ascendant, which is really fascinating, and we could talk about quite a bit. But Chiron is known as the mentor, the coach, the healer, but also the wounder. There's definitely a battle going on big time with Mars, from Donald Trump, triggering, activating the wounds of Joe, maybe very, very personal, maybe about his speech or anything else. But he also can be affecting a wound on Trump with his Chiron to Trump's Mercury and Ascendant. But there's a destiny here exactly between the Mars Ascendant and Joe's North Node and Chiron to be in the ring fighting with each other. And it's really, really fascinating. Chiron in the mythology taught the warriors and the healers of the Greek tradition. And here we have a major battle where there's going to be some wounds inflicted, probably not so much healing going on. But what we can see in Joe's chart, if we go to the transits and the progressions, here are the progressions, here are the transits. The progressions are a year for a day. So if we look at the chart here, we're going to see a 78-year-old. And Joe has the progress chart would be 1 year for a day, so 78 days after he was born. We're looking at that chart. It's a major predictive tool from astrologers. And then here's the cycles that are going on election day. So what do we see? Well, one of the first things we're going to see here is that Joe has this Jupiter in Cancer that is the ruler of his chart because it's Sag rising. And Jupiter is being really hit hard. The ruler of his chart, the captain of his ship, is being really hit hard by a Jupiter opposition, Pluto opposite Jupiter, and Saturn opposite Jupiter. This is the big triple conjunction in the sky that's been with us all year, but really, really strong again election day. And you can see the exact Jupiter-Pluto conjunction coming just days after the election. What this signifies, and we saw this again with Donald Trump's chart being hit by his Saturn-Venus, Joe's Jupiter at the same degrees pretty much. We know that when you get Jupiter and Saturn both involved, and then Pluto intensifying, bringing drama, bringing power struggles, bringing control issues, we're going to see major litigation with this election. We're going to see, as Donald Trump has already said, that this is probably going to go to the Supreme Court. And that's why he's been trying so hard to get another Supreme Court justice put in. And I'm recording this on September 25th, because the more sort of conservative energy that might be in the Supreme Court, when the election results are taken to Supreme Court, if that happens, then that could maybe go the way of Trump. But we see that this combination could bring a lot of, again, legal ramifications for both Joe and Trump as well. The opposition to the planet of faith, the planet of growth, the planet of abundance, the planet of inspiration and a sense of positivity and joy, and the ruler of the chart could be very challenging then for Joe. It doesn't bode as well. So that's one thing to watch for there. Jupiter also rules Joe's fourth house of the home, the inner self. So we could see that this could be extremely challenging for him. But there's more to say. There's more to say. So the first thing, let's notice that the planet Saturn is decreasing in its, not decreasing, but moving to the roots of the chart. Saturn rules professional life, which has to do with the top of the chart, the area of career. So typically we would see that when Saturn is going to the roots of the chart, and Jupiter as well, they will meet in Aquarius in just a couple months. That is more hidden than we would think, you know, if those were happening at the top of his chart up here. So that may show us that there's not as much emphasis out there in the public sphere, you know, but, you know, it's not the biggest cycle to be concerned with, but it is something to note. Yeah. So, all right, well, what else? Well, Jupiter is, and Saturn will be opposite his Pluto, but they'll also be the opposite Pluto for Trump. So that's not something huge to notice, but let's look more, let's drill down a little bit. Let's look at the fact that here you're going to see Mars, and then here you're going to see in Aries. Then look over here at Mercury. And in the days leading up to the election, Mercury again is retrograde. Mercury will change direction on the day of the elections. But Mercury will be opposite Joe's moon. Now, it doesn't look like it here, but it's a 5-degree opposition. The days leading up, Mercury is going backwards. So opposite the moon, well, the moon is our feeling center. It's our emotional body. This could also be very challenging for Joe, maybe with how he's speaking, maybe the words that he's choosing to use. It's not getting it out the right way. It doesn't feel very good. But Moon-Mercury opposition could also be a lot of emotion behind the words. And that emotion maybe could help him, right? But he needs to stay grounded. He needs to stay in the facts, Moon and Taurus, connecting with people's value systems if he wants to win the election. But this is kind of challenging. And then once Mercury goes direct on that day, Mercury will again oppose his moon. So in the weeks after the election, that could be challenging for Joe. Mars, right here, Mars will be coming to a square with his Jupiter. It is right now, as I speak, and in the month of October. Again, that could give him a lot of energy, a lot of motivation, a lot of drive, a lot of passion, which could be very good for him. But it also could make him very aggressive, very combative, which he might need in this situation. Mars will be squaring his Jupiter by the midpoint of December and to the end of the year. Once again, this could bring aggression and some intensity. Note that when Mars goes into Taurus, which will be right around the beginning of the year, actually the first weeks of January, Mars will be on his moon. That can create a lot of fighting energy as well, pushing him, again, creating some, a lot of inflammation and fury inside of him. Now, that could be happening if he's lost the election or Trump won't leave the office, but Joe's won. Lots of potentials with that. Also notice that when Mercury goes retrograde, which is actually October 14th, I'm backing up a little bit, Mercury will be very close at the 11th degree of Scorpio on Joe's Mars. Combative words, Mars, Mercury, again, competitive energy, very fiery, very impulsive language. Now, will that hurt him or will it fire him up? That's a big question. And note that Uranus is very close to opposing his Mars, which can be very volatile. We have to be very careful to be very reactive, very, like fireworks going off every moment. It could be crazy making. And so, but it also can help Joe to create a kind of, an individuality, a streak of like this kind of independence that he could bring that could show how he really stands out. That's the Uranus kind of eccentric, wild, kind of epiphanous energy. And he could have a way that he could really stand out with this, that could, he could do something radical that could bring a lot of people either into his world or out of his world. So we think of something very radical and wild happening here. Uranus being very strong with the Mercury retrograde cycle and very connected to his Mars, that drive, that passion, that really masculine yang energy. So again, it could go either way. It could fire him up. It could bring leadership to him if he can get really, kind of aggressive in a healthy way, competitive, or it could really spin him in a lot of different directions and get a kind of chaotic factor that could bring a lot of stress to him, and potentially harm his health, which we really have to watch for when Mercury comes to his Venus, which will be more in December, and the Sun when he has his solar return, which is coming, again, November 20th, his birthday. I think will be probably a very intense time as well for him. So the other thing that we have to talk about is that Joe has Neptune very strong in his chart right now. And over the next couple of years, Neptune is on his angle of the home and opposite his angle of career. And we talked about Neptune in the other video, the other part of the video with Donald Trump, squaring all of his Sun, Moon, Uranus, and nodes. Well, here we have the Neptune on the area of the home and opposite the area of career. And I'm going to show you something here, which is called locational astrology, which is one of the things that I focus on a lot in my practice, helping people find their power places around the world. And this is Joe Biden's chart on November 3rd, right? Here's Maryland and Washington, D.C., and very, very close to there. Neptune is on the angle of the home in that part of the country. The home, also the roots of the chart, the geography of the area, and Neptune dissolves boundaries. Neptune is the ruler of dreams. And Neptune can bring spiritual energy, mysticism, archetypal awareness, and, divine imagination into our life. And it can bring a lot of magic. Now, this could be where a feeling of magic arises in him, and like being chosen, the great myth unfolding, Neptune, the dream being realized, right? That could be one of the symbols here, but it could also be the undoing, the deception, the delusion, or way that some slippery energy takes away his maybe his rise to power. So something behind the scenes, right? It's a very slippery energy. It could go either way. And it could create even some kinds of madness in a person. And this could also be happening for Trump. Neptune, delusions of grandeur can be very, very strong with this. And I think whoever can hold their stuff together during this time is going to be, maybe victorious, but is going to at least be more sane on the other side of this. But I imagine that both of these candidates, maybe all of them, the vice presidents as well, will lose a lot of sanity in this process. Neptune being so strong, squaring the eclipses and squaring, or being on the angles of Trump or Biden's chart here. Do we see anything in his progress chart? Well, his moon is in Pisces, again, in the fourth house, the area of the home. Now, it could be I'm living in the dream home, again, the White House. It could be I'm fulfilling my dream and my spiritual calling. But again, Pisces we don't think of as a sign of governance. It's not a sign of war or battle or anything like that. It's more spiritual. It's more creative. So not necessarily strong, but what we do see that could bode very well for Joe in the next year is that Jupiter going into Aquarius, just like February, Jupiter will be very close to crossing his progressed sun. And the progressed sun is the evolution of our life force, our creative energy, and our sense of ego and identity. And we shouldn't underestimate the power of this, because this could be a sense of expansion, joy, opportunity, growth across his evolving sense of identity. For Joe, that could be one of the best cycles that we could see unfolding here. And that progressed sun will stay there. You know, so Jupiter will be on his progressed sun almost, we could say, all of 2021. That is probably the best thing going for Joe. Saturn will come to his progressed sun in 2022. Saturn rules governance and our professional life. So even though those planets are going to the bottom of the chart, they are touching his progressed sun, which is, you know, very significant, and, you know, something that could bode very well for Joe in his life. The sun in his chart rules his north node, which is his path of destiny. So this is something very, very significant for Joe at this time. And interesting, yeah, that on election day, Ceres is on his south node. Ceres is the dwarf planet that represents belonging, the great mother energy. Now it represents sorrow, represents loss as well. Ceres' daughter, Persephone, went to the underworld, stolen by Pluto. Now maybe something is stolen from Joe, we don't know. And there's this loss, there's a sense of the underworld being experienced. But maybe that's also the gathering of his community, all of these people, Democrats or others, you know, that he gains support from. And maybe he benefits from that transit of Ceres, and she brings the abundance and the fertility that she can bring. That may be a call for him to be really calling on mothers, on families, on caretakers, on nurses, maybe working with the themes of COVID, because Ceres represents all of those archetypes. And, you know, Ceres will be squaring his Venus and his Sun and his Mercury during this time. And again, the square is tense, it's challenging, but it could be something that if he works with this, calling on all of those archetypes, it could support him. Let's also note that the eclipse that happens on November 30th, which is a solar eclipse, is on Joe's Saturn. It's at 8 degrees of Gemini, so very close to his Saturn, very close to his descendant, the angle of partnership. So that's very, very significant. Now, it's also opposite his Juno. There's something about his wife or his very significant partners, contractual relationships, that are really up with that eclipse. And this could be very, very significant. Maybe we have a result by the end of November by those eclipses. And since Saturn rules Joe's third house and second house, maybe that is a sign that this is, you know, increasing his sense of self-worth and value and his communications. But, you know, it's a mixed bag, again, because he has the north node in his area of partnership, relationships, not in his own identity. It doesn't bode as well for him necessarily, but maybe people around him. But let's also look at the Sabian symbol for his Saturn, because it's being hit by that eclipse. What is that Sabian symbol? Well, that image, again, associated with his Saturn, is an airplane dives toward the earth as though falling. An airplane dives toward the earth as though falling. Now, that doesn't sound so good, right? It's being hit by an eclipse, which is a lunar eclipse. Sorry, let me make sure here. So yes, it's the lunar eclipse that will happen on November 30th. Lunar eclipses are very polarizing, very intense emotionally, and it hits his Saturn. Saturn is naturally a ruler of law and governance. Again, it rules his second house of values, money, and also third house of communication and ideas. Is his communication really challenged at that time? Has he experienced a sense of a low self-esteem after a loss, maybe, or a big battle? Possibly. Now, this symbol, it has a few different interpretations. Definitely, we're in a bit of a dive. Now, can you maintain control during that dive? Can you be pulled out of difficult situations, right? That's one of the questions with this symbol. It seems like your situation may be heading for disaster, but perhaps you can maintain control, and at the right moment, you'll be able to pull out the nosedive and save the day. And maybe it's some other people that help to save the day. because it's in his 7th house of partnerships. The question is, do you really always have an adequate grip on the controls? Are you or someone else actively working against people's best interests? Imagine yourself regaining control, physical, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually, and pull yourself out of the nosedive, and you'll become stronger and you will enjoy the experience at the same time. Integrity seems to be very important with this symbol, Saturn being a symbol of integrity, and how well he can compose himself, and really be stable through this process. Plunging into experiences without thoughts of ramifications. Does he really want what he thinks he wants? If you become conscious, you may be protected and saved at the last moment. Daredevil stunts or depression. Saturn can rule melancholia. The caution, refusing help even though disaster is imminent. Free falls, defying gravity and the consequences. Shakeups, neglect of physical realities. Crashing and burning. So there has to be a very strong attunement at this time during those eclipses. Again, the end of November, the middle of December is when the next eclipse comes. That eclipse is not as strong. Well, actually it is. It's actually squaring his angle of career and his angle of the home and his series. So that is also very fascinating, because that eclipse on December 14th, which is the last day, the day when the Electoral College in the US has to make its final decisions, squares his angle of career and home. I really believe that we're not going to feel or receive any results until that day, and it's going to determine a lot. That eclipse is hitting Donald Trump's chart and Joe's chart very significantly. You can see the fact that it hits career and home points, that this could be the game changer. So, I mean, it do we have a definitive answer for that? No, we don't. But we know it's going to be a big change, and that this could be very, very significant. It's so much, this chart, both of the charts of the candidates. What we can say, and what a lot of astrologers have been saying, is that this is not going to be cited on election day, probably not for weeks, or even, as we're saying, until that December 14th date. Maybe we don't have an incumbent, or we don't have the president leaving the office, as he said he might not do. If you'd like to learn more about some of the comments about how that might go down, there's an article from the Atlantic that you can tune in below the video, and you can see that to read about how that will go down. It can be quite an intense situation in the US, and there's a lot suggesting that might be the fate of this country. I talk a lot more about that in my video, which is the Astrological Fate of the USA, which is for a donation-based class that you can buy on the link that you'll see in the chat below. So check that out. It's a donation-based class. I hope this has been enlightening for you, that you've learned more astrology about Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and just in general, things like the Sabian symbols and the stars. I will mention one last star. I just remembered I was going to mention that to you. So let me share the screen. Well, you don't have to share the screen necessarily, but I want to mention a star called the Nebula. And the Nebula is a star that's on Joe's angle of career. And that star is, it's also kind of a mixed bag, but it's something that is very significant, because if we go back to Joe's chart, the career point, we said 19 Virgo here, is being hit by the eclipse, and the second eclipse in Sagittarius there. So it says, when the midheaven, the angle of career, is conjunct the nebula, it gives swift judgment. Sounds good. Okay, well, maybe, if it's not impulsive. It could bring despair. It could bring regrets, public disgrace, misfortune from the elements of nature. what does that mean? I mean, maybe, does that have to do with old age? Does it have to do with, you know, just the conditions we have, you know, in our bodies as we age? You know, people have talked about some of the challenges Joe has mentally. I don't know if maybe that could signify that. But then also, Denebola could be happiness turned to anger. And makes its natives noble. Now, that's the other side of it. It could make the native noble. Daring, self-controlled, generous, and busy with other people's affairs. Wow. So check out more about the star Denebola. It's part of the lion, and very, very significant here in Joe's chart. So I love talking about the stars and the asteroids and the Sabian symbols, these extra parts of the charts. You know, Moskva, which is an asteroid, is also very significant in Joe's chart. So we do think that Russia, because the Moskva, the asteroid is named after Moscow, is playing another significant role in these elections. Moscow is very, very strong as an asteroid in both Donald Trump's and Joe Biden's charts. In fact, in Donald Trump's chart, Moskva, Moskva, is it's just wild. Is squaring his nodes, his sun and his moon, and we talked about that, right? That's also means that Neptune is squaring his Moskva, meaning that again, if there's some kind of deception going on, it's probably something to do with Russia, Moscow. Again, very, very significant. That's so fascinating because Moscow, the asteroid, is at 22 degrees of Virgo in Trump's chart. 22 degrees of Virgo is 3 degrees away from Joe Biden's angle of career. So Trump's Moscow could be affecting Joe Biden's career, right? See how that works? But what about Moscow in Moskva in Joe's chart? Well, let's see if I have the notes on that here. There's so many that we've tuned into. I believe that Moskva is connected to his Venus-Sun conjunction. And so again, life force, creativity, life, you know, leadership, the Sun, people, affections, intimacy, values, likability. So there's something going on here. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But all right. Well, all the best. Wishing you well. Stay positive during this time, wherever you are in the world or in the US. Expect the unexpected, a wild ride with a strong Uranus in the sky during these times. And just know that real leadership comes from each one of us. Our own creative superpowers is what's going to, you know, lead the world forward. So however you are a creator, a leader, an initiator, this is an important time for you to step up and to not project, you know, the leadership of a country onto one person, but really onto your own heart and your community that you're a part of. I wish you well. My name is Verlus from Divine Timing Coaching. Namaste.